Hello friends, welcome to a new topic today. In this chapter, we will learn about the stages of anesthesia. So in the stages of anesthesia, the first stage is beginning of anesthesia to the loss of consciousness. So the main landmark in the first stage is loss of consciousness. Okay, so first from the start of anesthesia till the patient loses his consciousness, we call it as stage 1 of anesthesia, and this is the stage of analgesia or disorientation. What do we call this stage 1 as? This is called as stage of analgesia or disorientation. Stage of analgesia or disorientation, right? Next what do you see as second stage? Second stage is from loss of consciousness to onset of autonomic breathing. Autonomic breathing will be the landmark in stage 2. Here if you see, eyelash reflexes will disappear. Okay, because here the breathing becomes automatic, so the respiration becomes irregular with breath holding spells. So what is seen here? Here the respiration becomes irregular with breath holding spells are seen in second stage. What is the second stage called? It is called as stage of excitement or derailment. We call this second stage as stage of excitement or derailment. Okay, so this is the second stage. Next, then if you see in the third stage is again divided into 3 planes. Now if you see, this third stage is again divided into 3 planes. This is from the autonomic stage of autonomic respiration to paralysis of respiratory muscles. Here what actually happens is, here there is paralysis of respiratory muscles are seen. Okay, so what is the first stage? First stage is from the beginning of anesthesia to loss of consciousness. Second stage is from the loss of consciousness to beginning of autonomic breathing. Okay, this is stage of excitement or derailment. Then if you see in the third stage, we have the proper, this third stage is called as the stage of surgical anesthesia. Okay, this third stage is divided into four phases. Okay, in the third stage, first we have third stage 4 planes. These are called as planes. Okay, we have in stage 3 and plane 1, this is from onset of autonomic respiration to cessation of eyeball movement. Here we have onset of autonomic respiration to cessation of eyeball movement is seen in first plane of surgical anesthesia, stage 3 first plane. And here if you see, what is lost? Eyelid reflex is lost, swallowing movements are lost, and there is marked eyeball movement. What do you see here? Eyelid reflex is lost, swallowing reflex is lost, and there is marked eyeball movement is seen in stage 3 plane 1. So what do you see in stage 3 plane 1? There is onset of autonomic respiration to cessation of eyeball movements. Here eyeball reflex, eyelid reflex is lost, and swallowing reflex is lost, and there is marked eyeball movements. Okay, that is stage 3 plane 1. Then what do you see in stage 3 plane 2? In stage 3 plane 2, it is from the cessation of this eyelid movements to intercostal muscle paralysis. The first muscle to get paralyzed here is intercostal muscle paralysis occurs. So intercostal muscle paralysis starts here. Then here what are lost? Which reflexes are lost? Here some deeper reflex. See, all these are superficial reflexes. Eyelid reflex or swallowing reflex or marked eyeball movements are superficial reflexes, which are mostly voluntary reflexes, right? Not voluntary reflexes. These are the reflexes of voluntary actions. Okay. Then if you see in the second phase, in the second plane, mostly the deeper reflexes are lost. Like that you can remember. Laryngeal reflex is lost. There is increased tear secretion, and respiration becomes regular in this plane 2. Okay. Then in plane 3 we have complete paralysis of intercostal muscles. Now there is complete paralysis of intercostal muscles occurs. So diaphragm paralysis will start in this stage. Pupils get dilated and there is no light reflex. Pupils get dilated and there is no light reflex. It is during this phase that we give we start giving, we start doing operation. We maintain the patient in this stage 3, plane 3. Then we have stage 4. In stage 4, there is complete intercostal and complete diaphragmatic paralysis. In stage 3, you see, mainly complete diaphragmatic paralysis is seen. So this is stage 3. So in stage 3, in plane 1, what are important? These are important. There is cessation of eyeball movements, eyelid reflex is lost, swallowing reflex is lost, and marked eyeball movement is seen. In stage 2, it is from cessation of eyeball movement to intercostal muscle paralysis. Here laryngeal reflex is lost, tear secretion increases, and respiration becomes irregular. In stage 3, plane 3, we have complete paralysis of intercostal muscles. Diaphragm becomes paralysis, and diaphragm paralysis will start, and pupil dilated and no light reflex. In stage 3, plane 4, there is complete diaphragmatic paralysis. Okay, so this is seen. Next, if you see next, in stage 4, what do you see in stage 4? In stage 4, you see stoppage of respiration, and finally there will be death. So where do you maintain the anesthesia? As I have already said, the anesthesia will always be maintained in plane 2 or plane 3 in stage 3. In either plane 2 or plane 3, we will maintain the anesthesia. Right? So the same thing I have given in a proper diagrammatic view. So we have anesthesia is given here. So this is the place where you give anesthesia. General anesthesia is given. Once you give general anesthesia, now there is loss of consciousness. From the anesthesia giving to the loss of consciousness, we have stage 1. Now from the loss of consciousness to the starting of autonomic breathing, we have stage 2. From the autonomic breathing to the respiratory paralysis, we have stage 3. This stage 3 is divided into 4 planes. Plane 1, we have autonomic breathing to cessation of eyeball movement. That is plane 1. Plane 2, we have cessation of eyeball movement to paralysis of intercostal muscle beginning. Then that is plane 2. Plane 3, we have from the beginning of intercostal muscle to the complete intercostal muscle paralysis. In plane 4, we have a complete paralysis of intercostal muscle to the diaphragmatic paralysis. That is nothing but respiratory paralysis. In stage 4, there is death. From respiratory paralysis, which progresses to death, is stage 4. Okay, so this is about the different planes of anesthesia. Then if you see, then let us learn about the pre-anesthetic evaluation. Okay, so in the pre-anesthetic evaluation, first we have history, general examination, and we can do systemic examination. So in anesthesia, we will ask the patient to do one test which is called as breath holding time. What does this breath holding time signify? So in this breath holding time, what this actually mean is, here we have in the systemic examine, this is here what we do is we have to ask the person to hold the breath for some time. If he is able to hold the breath for 25 seconds, then it is normal. If he is only able to hold the breath for 15 to 25 seconds, then that is borderline. If he is only able to hold the breath for less than 15 seconds, then that is pulmonary dysfunction. So this is what we see in breath holding time. Okay, next if we see, we have the grades for anesthesia scoring. So that grades is called as American Society for Anesthesia Grading. This will assess the physical status and risk associated with surgery. What is this called as? American Society for Anesthesia Grading. Okay, what do you see in this? In this we call it as grade 1. When do you call it as grade 1? Grade 1 is called when there is localized problem with no comorbidity. That is a healthy patient. Okay, in grade 2 we have controlled comorbidity with no or minimal physical limitation. Okay, here there is comorbidity definitely, but that has low or no or minimal physical limitation. That is grade 2. In grade 3 we have comorbidity with moderate limitation. This is comorbidity with moderate limitation is grade 3. That is, here there is obese patient with BMI less than 35, or there is systemic disease patient. Obese patient with BMI less than 35 has a systemic disease. So here there is moderate limitation is present. In grade 4 we have comorbidity, which is a constant threat to life. This is life, which is a constant threat to life. Here comorbidity is a constant threat to life. That is grade 4. Okay, and we have grade 5 where surgery is the only option available and you have nothing to do. So you will have to definitely do a surgery. And here in anesthesia grading we can add E to this grade, like 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E and 5E. What does E mean? E means that we should do an emergency surgery. So this is American Society of Anesthesia grading. Then we'll have to even evaluate the airway. How are you going to evaluate the airway? Airway is evaluated by mouth opening. So we have a grading system for this airway evaluation, which is called as Mallampati grading. According to Mallampati grading, we have 4 grades of Mallampati grading. So these are the 4 grades. The first grade is called as, here in this, when you ask the patient to open his mouth and say ah, then if you see the hard palate, soft palate along with uvula and fauces, these are the tonsillar pillars with fauces, soft palate, hard palate, soft palate, hard palate and uvula is seen, then that is grade 1. Then in grade 2 we can see soft palate, hard palate and uvula, but the feces which are there, fauces which are there, these are not visible. If fauces are not visible but you can see hard palate, soft palate and uvula, then that is grade 2. Then when do you call it as grade 3? Grade 3 is when only hard and soft palate are visible, then that is grade 3. In grade 4 only hard palate is visible, that is grade 4. Okay, so these are the 4 grades of Mallampati grading. Then here even tonsillar pillar, I forgot to tell, in grade 1 tonsillar pillar are also visible. Next we will have to see the neck range. Okay, then after this airway, in the airway evaluation we have seen Mallampati grading. Second, you have to also see the neck movement. Is there any proper neck movement? Range of neck movements should be noted. Atlanto-occipital joint movements should be noted. Whether there are proper atlanto-occipital joint movements are there or not, we should note them. And thyromental distance and mentohyoid distance should also be noted. What is thyromental distance? Thyromental distance, as the name says, it is between the thyroid notch to the mentum in full extension. Okay, this distance between the thyroid notch to the mentum in full extension is noted, and if it is more than 6.5 centimeters, then it is normal. If it is between 6 to 6.5 centimeters, it is difficult. If it is less than 6 centimeters, then it is very difficult. Then we have mentohyoid distance. What is the distance between? This is the mentohyoid distance is the distance between the mentum and the hyoid bone, right? See, I am just showing the diagrammatic representation. This is the mentum and this is the thyroid. So this is thyromental distance. Then what is mentohyoid? So this is thyromental distance, right? We have shown the thyromental distance. If this distance is more than, if this thyromental distance is more than 6.5 centimeters, then this is normal. If this thyromental distance is between 6 to 6.5 centimeters, then that is equivocal. If it is less than 6.5 centimeters, then we said it is very less. Okay, and we should look at it. And then we have one more, which is called as mentohyoid distance. So here we have hyoid bone. This is mentohyoid distance, which is the distance between the mentum and the hyoid bone, is called as mentohyoid distance, right? Next we will have to learn about the pre-anesthetic orders. Okay, once we have evaluated the patient, we will have to look at all the pre-anesthetic medications and orders that you should give before you actually take the person to the surgery. So if you see, in the pre-anesthetic order, there is no routine pre-anesthetic medication. There are no medication that should be given for each and every patient. Okay, it depends upon the indications and the appropriate convenience. Unless there is an indication, we actually do not prefer any pre-anesthetic medications. So first if you see, what is the aim for pre-anesthetic medication? The aim for pre-anesthetic medication is to relieve anxiety. Because he is going through surgery, the patient will have general anxiety. In order to relieve this general anxiety, we can use the pre-anesthetic medication. Then it can also be used to decrease the secretions. For decreasing secretions, we can prefer atropine. Okay, for decreasing secretions, atropine, glycopyrrolate are given, but among this, glycopyrrolate is more preferred because it has no CNS side effects. Because it has no CNS side effects, glycopyrrolate is more preferred than atropine. Second, we can use medications to decrease. Why should you use one more type of medications? To decrease the aspirations. Because in general anesthesia, there will be relaxation of all muscles of the body. So in order to release, in order to decrease, because there is relaxation, there is an increased chances of aspiration. So in order to decrease aspiration also, we give these medications, which include, we can give metoclopramide, and we can also give strict fasting or nil per oral. We should give metoclopramide. What does this metoclopramide do? This metoclopramide will decrease the aspiration. And second, we should also ask the patient to go for nil per oral, that is NPO. So when do you give the food? Okay, in adults and pediatrics, you should limit food for 8 hours for solid foods. You should put nil per oral for 8 hours for solid foods. That means for 8 hours, for the past 8 hours, if you are doing surgery now, at least for the last 8 hours, he should not eat anything. Okay, so that is for 8 hours, he should not take solid foods. For the last 6 hours, he should not take liquid foods or semi-solid foods. And for the last 2 hours, he should not take any clear fluids. Okay, so that is rules for adults. In pediatric age group, if you see, we should give formula feeding should be given before 6 hours only. In the last 6 hours of surgery, before surgery, in the last 6 hours before surgery, no food, no formula feeds are allowed for the baby. Then in the last 4 hours before surgery, breast milk is also avoided for 4 hours. And for the last 2 hours, clear water is also avoided for the last 2 hours. But according to the recent guideline, this clear water can be given 1 hour before the surgery. 1 hour nil per oral for clear fluids is sufficient according to liberal guideline given by British Ireland Anesthesia Society. According to this, 1 hour nil per oral may be sufficient for clear fluids. So we will see what again. Okay, in adults, we should put 8 hours nil per oral for solid foods, 6 hours nil per oral for liquid and semi-solid foods, 2 hours nil per oral for clear fluids. Then in pediatrics, 6 hours nil per oral for formula feeds, 4 hours nil per oral for breast milk, and 2 hours nil per oral for clear water. Okay, then here you will have to, in order to prevent post-operative nausea and vomiting, we can give ondansetron is the drug which can be given to prevent post-op nausea and vomiting. Okay, so these are the pre-anesthetic medications which are given for the patient. Then in order to decrease the infections, obviously antibiotics can be given. Okay, then what are the orders regarding the previous medication? This is also important. You should give some orders regarding the previous medication. So if you see, if the patient is using oral antihypertensive drugs, okay, these oral antihypertensive drugs should be continued till the day of surgery. If the patient is using oral antihypertensive drugs, they should be continued till the day of surgery. If the patient is using oral hypoglycemic drugs, Okay, if minor oral hypoglycemic drugs, then you can continue the dose. If it is major, very major, then you will have to stop 24 hours prior to surgery and put the patient on insulin, because there is increased chances of hyperglycemic variations during surgery. So in order to prevent this and for better glycemic control, we will have to put the patient on insulin. Then, if the patient is taking either antipsychotics, antidepressants or anti-epileptics, okay, those drugs which are actually acting on brain, like antipsychotics, antidepressants and anti-epileptics, in such cases you will have to ask the person to continue them till the day of surgery. Okay, if the patient is taking anticoagulants, okay, anticoagulants should also be continued based on the type of anticoagulant that he is taking. If the patient is taking aspirin, then he should continue aspirin till the day of surgery. If the patient is taking clopidogrel, you should stop clopidogrel 4 days prior to surgery. Clopidogrel is stopped 4 days prior to, 7 days, I'm really sorry, clopidogrel should be stopped 7 days prior to surgery. Ticlopidin should be stopped 14 days prior to surgery. Warfarin should be stopped 4 days prior to surgery. Low molecular weight heparin should be stopped 12 to 24 hours prior to surgery. Unfractioned heparin should be stopped 6 hours prior to surgery. Let me tell you again, anticoagulants, aspirin should be continued till the day of surgery. Clopidogrel should be stopped 7 days prior to surgery. Ticlopidin should be stopped 14 days prior to surgery. Warfarin should be stopped 4 days prior to surgery. Low molecular weight heparin should be stopped 12 to 24 hours prior to surgery. Unfractioned heparin should be stopped 6 hours prior to surgery. Then we have to give thyroid medications. You will have to give thyroid medications. These should be continued till the day of surgery. Okay. Then steroids. See, if the patient is put on steroids for 3 weeks per year, for around 3 weeks per year, if the patient is put on steroids, then this will inhibit the hypothalamo-pituitary axis. Okay, so you should be very careful in this. So because patient is put on steroids for 3 weeks per year, you should supplement these steroids in perioperative period. Why? Because during this perioperative period, there is increased stress activity. That, see, surgery is a stress towards the body. It is, in one way or the other, it is stressful activity occurring on the body. Because surgery is a stressful activity occurring on the body, so patient, in order that the patient should cope up with stress, the normal patient's body will produce more amount of cortisol, right? But in this patient, if you see, in those patients who are using steroids for 3 weeks per year, in the last 3 weeks, if he has been continuously using these steroids would have caused inhibition of hypothalamo-pituitary axis. So because this axis is inhibited, now in these patients who are on steroids, the normal stress reflex does not occur and cortisol will not be produced. Okay, so because of that, we will have to supplement these steroids in post-operative period. So because surgery is stressful, we will have to supplement it. But what are the contraindications for this supplementation of steroids? So if there is either diabetes mellitus or active infection, or in case of immunosuppression, okay, in these cases we should not supplement steroid medication, because thus this supplementation will cause more problem, and because of that we will have to wait for this hypothalamo-pituitary axis to become normal, and once it becomes normal, then we can go through the surgery. Okay, next. The next drugs include, if it is an OCP, oral contraceptive pills, they should be continued till the day of surgery. If it is a high dose estrogen can be stopped 4 weeks before surgery. High dose estrogen can be stopped 4 weeks before surgery. If there is any herbal medication should be stopped 24 weeks prior surgery. Herbal medication should be stopped 24 weeks prior surgery. In hormone replacement therapy should be stopped 6 to 8 weeks prior surgery. Hormone replacement therapy should be stopped 6 to 8 weeks prior surgery. If a person is smoking, this smoking should be stopped 3 months or 90 days prior to surgery. Okay, smoking should be stopped 90 days or 3 months prior to surgery. If you take a medical stunt you should keep it at a gap of, for medical stunt a surgery should be done after a gap of 1 year. For bare metal stunt, there should be a gap of 1 month before doing surgery. Then for levodopa, if you see, so for metal stunt you should take a gap of 1 year. For medical stunt you should take a gap of 1 year. For bare metal stunt you should take a gap of 3 months. Levodopa, if you see, this levodopa should be continued. You will have to continue levodopa. And then if one takes Viagra or sildenafil, this sildenafil should be stopped 24 hours prior to surgery. Okay, so these are the timelines which are very important. So once we should, even before surgery itself, we should make sure that the patient does not have any airway compromising conditions, because these airway compromising conditions will cause more problem during surgery, as it is difficult in these patients for intubation. Okay, so what are the airway compromising conditions? They include, they can be congenital conditions or they can be acquired conditions. What are the congenital conditions? The congenital conditions include that is Pierre-Robin syndrome. In Pierre-Robin syndrome there can be micrognathia, cleft palate and macroglossia. In Pierre-Robin syndrome the patient can suffer from micrognathia, cleft palate and macroglossia.